Hi, everyone. Today I'm chatting with one of our speakers at the upcoming Canadian Leadership Congress International Best Practices Forum being held in Vancouver at the Fairmont Waterfront from October 12th to 14th. Chief Billy Morin joins me. He was elected as the youngest chief in Enoch Cree Nation's modern history in 2015 and served 3 consecutive terms as chief. He'll be joining us at the forum to share his experiences working with the energy sector as part of our panel on Indigenous communities in Canada's energy transition. Welcome, Chief.
Sanitapi, Carolyn, and everybody.
Excellent. So tell me, what has the relationship historically been like between Indigenous communities and the energy industry, and has it been changing?
Yeah, thanks for the question. That's I can take that several different directions, but I have to say overall, very paternalistic, very one-sided, very undefined, and very ignorant. And, that's various players in the question itself, with federal governments and provincial governments and private sector. So, with industry and First Nations, historically, we are under a federal jurisdiction. So a lot of oversight from there. Not a lot of self-determination in making decisions. But again, I think, there's so much opportunity in terms of what we do going forward. So, in our history, my great-great-grandfather was chief in the 1950s. There's an oil and gas boom. I think we're the exception to rule because we're right in the heart of Leduc #1, Alberta, and it provided a lot of opportunity and wealth to the nation. But it also brought some historical, I'd say, indifferences and injustices with industry itself. So again, you kind of didn't get to the full potential of looking at Indigenous rights. I do see that changing, though. Over the last 10 years, the Silcotton case of 2014, this era of reconciliation, the move to ESG, First Nations are a true catalyst in being a part of that. And I think industry in Canada, provincial governments are starting to take notice in terms of the changing dynamic. So, I was on a recent trip to Bay Street, and one of the big 5 banks told me, it's right there in one of our mission statements, maybe not directly the mission statements, but the investment statements, that, no ESG without, no economic reconciliation without Indigenous ownership. So things are changing in the right direction, but we're still, I would say, hoping to take it to a new level here in Canada.
Yeah. So I want to talk to you a little bit about, what's changing and why you think Indigenous communities are really key to Canada's energy transition.
Well, again, in the last couple of years, maybe it's more than a couple of years, like a decade, 2014 Silcotton case, Mikisew a couple of years ago, challenging Bill C-69. Treaty rights, again, have historically been recognized by the Canadian Constitution. So these rights and these kind of unique aspects of Indigenous relationships with Canadian law and Canadian land do exist. And again, in the era of reconciliation, they're becoming elevated in the discussion of society in Canada. So, Silcotton case recognized that not just reserve lands, the small plots of lands that we live on, but the traditional territories, which cover basically all of Canada, are vast tracts of BC, Western Canada, all the way into Nova Scotia. They're not reserve lands, but they're traditional territories recognized by Canadian law that Indigenous people have rights and ownership over those. So it comes without saying that with those titles and some of those legal cases, that Indigenous peoples, First Nations, Métis, have a lot more say in how those lands are developed than some of the paternalistic Indian Act things and things that have been going on for the previous 100 years. So industry is forced to, for lack of a better word, move with Indigenous peoples when they develop huge projects in the traditional territory. Now, when you go through the Supreme Court and, again, the old school historic paternalistic actions come into play, that's obviously not the best way of doing things between just 2 human beings at the end of the day. So, I look towards things like the Cascade project here that we've accomplished for a government loan guarantee program here in Alberta. I look to liquid natural gas and some of the huge investments and partnerships they've done in BC. I was just scouring the website across the country for Narcan yesterday and noticed that a big, huge hydro project in Manitoba is set to be completed next year with 25% ownership of Indigenous communities, and of course Quebec with hydro in Cree territory over there is also a huge, and has been huge for a number of decades. So as opposed to going through the Supreme Courts and arguing, I think business lends its hand to the catalyst of actually having a common language and moving Canada in a direction where we can, it's Canada at the end of the day. We have natural abundance of natural resources and energy. That's our place in the world. But Indigenous peoples are being recognized as a true business partner, and business is a common language to move us forward together to, meet those goals of net zero, if that's communities' goals and the nation's goals by 2050, or if it's just highlighting ESG and smart, bigger contributions and investments beyond just the bottom line. That's very important. But if it's ESG, the S for Indigenous inclusion is really going to be highlighted by how we set the business relationship going forward.
You've talked about ESG, you've talked about Indigenous inclusion. What still needs to change for this all to come together?
Well, I think I can't solve this one on a panel. It's going to take a little bit more of an education, just time and relationship building. But, being an Indigenous leader, I actually see Indigenous people being their own kind of, the only one stopping them is themselves. But I recognize that my audience is probably not primarily Indigenous communities today. So, I'll speak to what business and investors and what the audience can do, which is non-Indigenous communities and leadership on the grassroots level. So, I think recognizing, across the country right now, land acknowledgements at sporting events and political events and social community events is nice. It again speaks towards that, how the society is changing in general for the good, for the better. But in business and investment and natural resources and ESG, taking it to a new level, I think I'll use an example. Early on in our carbon capture RFP win here locally in Alberta, the provincial government mandated, if you partner with Indigenous communities early on, that's going to be one of our 4 or 5 criteria to win this RFP. Not the number one factor, which it was, but it's not. But it is a factor at the end of the day. And those companies who didn't come to us with, this is the way we're going to do it, you're either with us or not, they came to us and said, can we create the plan together? And so, again, I recognize that's new for investors and new for operators and builders of large capital and energy projects. But coming early, I think industry is recognizing that you have to have an Indigenous engagement and inclusion plan, but coming at the start too, as opposed to this is the way we've always done it. You're either with us and we're just going to tell you how it is. So getting in early is a really good thing for investors and people who are building large scale energy projects.
Excellent. I look forward to speaking with you more in October, and I thank you for joining us today.
Thank you. Looking forward to October as well.